Just as a reminder, like I said, there's plenty more workshops to sign up for. So this will continue throughout the entire month of May. So please check the website, greenhopeproject.org. If you missed any of them, it's a possibility because there's so many. It's just hard to catch them. There's a lot of great ones. We do have them recorded, and we will put the recordings up on the website and on YouTube. So just hang tight. If you want to know when those recordings become available, the best way is to newsletter. Okay, so on that note, we just want to thank Howard for presenting on this. I'm going to turn it over to you because you're the expert on this, Howard.
Thank you, Candy. Welcome. Okay, let's dive in to how you can teach your students about our ecosystem and how they can help Mother Earth. Now, so we're looking at effective education for ecosystemic health, but I want to focus today is very much about you as educators. And for those of you who are not primarily educators, put yourself back in the mindset of educator. Today is for teachers. Today is for people who are facilitating learning. And we have two major sides to that. One is your long-term aspirations, and the other is the here and now. And this seminar is going to become a workshop in the second half, and it's going to become interactive. But right now, I am here to share with you two big ideas. And if nothing else, a week or a month or a year or a decade after today, I want you to remember two things from today. One of those has to do with the long term, the big picture, the aspiration that you as an educator are coming here today with. Where do you want things to go? And the other has to do with your here and now reality as a teacher in El Paso in 2021. So those are the two contexts and the two big ideas address and center around those two areas. Now, you came here because how to teach your students about our ecosystem and how they can help heal Mother Earth attracted you to be here today. And when we look at Mother Earth and how to heal Mother Earth and how to actually help Mother Earth out, there are many, many, many metaphors, many, many ways we think about it. And some people think about saving the planet. Some people about making the world a better place. There are many, many, many different slogans, bumper stickers, and over the 40 plus years of the environmental movement, there have been all kinds of different ways that we've contextualized this. And in terms of our long-term aspiration, the distant star we can navigate by, no matter what changes in our lives or what changes in the world, whether there's a pandemic here or an oil pipeline explodes or the oil spills, no matter what happens, we can always navigate by a distant star. But we've never in the environmental movement really gotten really super clear about that distant star so that we really have a fixed star to navigate by that always works. As an educator, if you're shaping the lives of elementary students who are 10, 20, 40, 50, 60, 80 years later, going to think back to what you taught them in elementary school, what is something you can give them that will last their entire lives? I mean, if they're going to be alive in the year 2100, what can you give them today that will still last in the year 2100? And after 40 years of working on this myself, I want to share with you something that really can stand the test of time. And to stand the test of time, we have to go deep. Now, I could go Socratic and share with you how I came up with this and then give it to you as a punchline. But rather, I'm going to start with the punchline. And the punchline is this: the health and well-being of the ecosystem. The whole ecosystem is the most important thing of all, period. Ecosystemic health, the health and well-being of the whole ecosystem. So let's compare this to, say, saving the planet. And, we all want to save the planet, right? Except, well, after we've destroyed the ecosystem, after all the plants and animals have gone extinct, after the nuclear wars, after the climate chaos and collapse, the planet will still be here. There just won't be any life, or there might be, cockroaches and mutated single-cell organisms, but there will have been a collapse of tens of millions of years of evolution if we don't get wise and become better stewards for spaceship Earth. So saving the planet isn't a good enough optimization criterion. Saving the spotted owl or alar and apples or all kinds of other environmental missions are pieces, unfortunately, they all cause us to get into fights between jobs in the environment, or between this group that wants to create a new way of living and this group that wants to preserve it as a natural environment, and all kinds of petty lower level stuff that all makes, all of that dissolves when you can think about a distant star we can all agree on. Here's the thing. No matter who you are as a human being on this planet, you can agree that if someone improves the health of the ecosystem, it's good for you. In other words, it's good for me if you improve the ecosystem. It's good for you if I improve the ecosystem, improve the health of the ecosystem. When we talk about Mother Earth, that is a metaphor, right? We're personifying the Earth, the living planet, Gaia, the goddess of Earth. The Gaia hypothesis, the hypothesis that the Earth is one living organism. Well, Mother Earth is a metaphor. The health of Mother Earth is made tangible and something we can do science about. We can do social studies about. We can do math about. We can do every subject that you teach about, looking towards a healthy ecosystem. So I want to have you take away from today, into your activism, into your artwork, into your life, and most importantly, because we're talking about education today, into your classroom, into the minds of your students, that there's nothing more important than the health and well-being of our shared ecosystem. Now, to do that, as an educator, you're going to come at that depending on, are you teaching first graders, third graders, middle schoolers, high schoolers? Some of you might even be teaching older folks. You're going to take this idea at an age-appropriate level. But even someone in kindergarten can understand what we mean by the health and well-being of the ecosystem, because what you can do is you can say, do you like being healthy in your body? Even a 5-year-old knows that it's not fun to be sick. And their body doesn't feel good when they're sick. Even when you're 3, 4, 5 years old, you know that. Now imagine that your body is the whole world. Do you want to be sick? No. Imagine that your body is the whole planet, the whole world. Take on the idea of having them map their individual self, their individual body, to the whole world, and don't they want to be healthy? Isn't it a good thing? And wouldn't it be good if everybody thought this way, because everybody wants the world to be a healthy place to live in? That's how you can explain this to even the youngest students. Now, say you have students in high school. Now, in high school, say you're a science teacher. Well, you're teaching them about physics and chemistry and biology. All of those are relevant to the question of a healthy ecosystem. Now, when we talk about an ecosystem, we're talking about all of life, all the plants, all the animals, all the single-cell organisms, and everything relevant to life. So that means the air, the breathability of the air for the animals, being able to breathe in the oxygen without toxic pollutants. For the plants, being able to take in not too much carbon dioxide and being able to put out an abundant amount of oxygen so that the plants and the animals have a healthy relationship with each other. Having the ability to have a healthy relationship between plants and animals, between the multicellular organisms and the single-cell organisms. And as you begin to look at this, you can understand from a biological point of view what it means when the whole ecosystem is healthy and when subsystems within the whole ecosystem are healthy or unhealthy. So, for example, the most important current crisis in terms of the overall ecosystemic crisis, the one that everybody is focusing a lot on this year, this decade, is the climate crisis. Climate involves atmosphere, involves the hydrosphere, oceans, and other bodies of water. Climate is the superstructure within which the higher frequency things like weather happen, the ocean currents, and so on. But it's still not the entire ecosystem. The ecosystem includes climate, and having a viable, workable, hospitable climate is essential for life. And without a hospitable climate, there would be no humanity at all. We'll all be dead if the climate chaos becomes so chaotic that it swings to hotter and colder and wetter and drier and all the different swings to the point where it comes and collapses and settles at a completely different homeostasis point. It's like 150, if the average temperature on planet Earth settles in at 150 degrees, which is certainly possible given the direction we're going, well, we wouldn't be alive if the average temperature is 150 degrees. And already in the Persian Gulf and the oil regions, they've already been hitting temperatures above 140 degrees sometimes. So this is not, unfortunately, this is not in the realm of science fiction. This is, unfortunately, potentially happening unless we do things differently. So as an educator, you can get at the health and well-being of the ecosystem through science, but say you teach social studies. Once again, how our civic institutions work, the economics, the politics, the sociology, all are relevant to how do we heal the ecosystem and how do we keep it healthy? How do we see the human impacts on the ecosystem so that instead of being parasitic, being toxic, human beings become symbiotic with the rest of the ecosystem. And understanding that ecosystem is the full system. But subsets of that we can study through ecology. The study of the logic, the spirit of how different parts of the ecosystem work. But even more reductionistic is economics. And economics is an approximation to ecology, which is an approximation to ecosystem. Each is less holistic. Economics is less holistic, but it's more tangible, it's more quantifiable, it's more numeric. Economics is the naming and the counting of what's in the home. The ecos is the home. Ecos is the Greek word for home. So the word ecos in economy is the counting and naming of the things in the home. Ecology is the logic of how things work in the home, the logos, the spirit, and the logic, the how it makes sense, how it works. And the ecosystem is the totality of all life and everything that affects life. So now we can come at it from the social sciences and from the physical sciences. Of course, as Candace and Green Hope Project make very clear, and as the graphics gatherings that I've been sponsoring over the last 40 years make clear, art, music, creativity, expression are a tremendous pathway towards waking people up, having people express aspiration, and so with humanities and the arts, being able to bring inspiration towards the health and well-being of the ecosystem. And we can go through every different subject in your curriculum, in the overall high school structure, and see that there's some way that you can come from what you're being told you have to teach and bring it to bear on inspiring your students towards ecosystemic health. Now, this big idea of ecosystemic health, the health and well-being of the whole ecosystem, is one of the two big ideas that I'm asking you to take from today and have in your heart for the rest of your life, and to bring to all your students and to bring to anybody and everybody that you touch. The second big idea brings it into more of the here and now. And then from the here and now, how it moves into the future. So we've been working, the first big idea brings it from the distant star, the aspiration that ecosystemic health will still be a great aspiration in 100 years, in 80 years from now. It will still be a distant star to navigate by. We bring that back to the present. But now let's look as an educator, what are your challenges? And this leads us into the second big idea having to do with education. And anybody who can turn on their camera, and I would like to be able to see more of the cameras so that I can see more of the input here. Because now we're going to be looking at the state of the educational context, the state of what your constraints are. And we're going to be looking at the big picture of education. And I'm going to start this out with a big observation about the state of the overall educational system and bring the second idea into focus. And then we're going to have a round of introductions where everybody will introduce themselves and talk about their educational perspectives, and then bring up the topics and questions that they'd like to talk about further. And that's going to lead to the second half of today's session. So here is a very I was going to say profound. I'll use the word profound observation about education. Our education system has this idea that you have a general education in the earliest times, Like when you're an elementary school teacher, you teach all the different subjects to your students in the earliest years. When you get into middle school, when your students are in middle school, they are now having different teachers for different subjects. And in high school, it's already compartmentalized into the different subjects. When students get into college, there is some distribution requirement, but already in the first or second, and certainly by the third year and four-year program, they have to pick a major, and they have to focus, and if they have to do a thesis, they have to narrow and narrow and narrow. If they get a master's degree, they have to narrow further, and if they get a PhD, they narrow further to go very, very deep into something very specific. And the phrase has been coined by others than me about knowing more and more about less and less. That our educational system, as it gets more and more advanced, leads to a narrowing of focus so that the student can go very, very deep with the idea that they can create some contribution that is the first contribution on that specific thing in the whole world. They can publish, they can be known for that. This does not support ecosystemic health. The health and well-being of our ecosystem can only be understood and administered to and nursed back to health through understanding how everything affects everything else. By thinking long-term and worldwide and seeing the big picture and understanding how everything affects everything else. And I claim that the most important discoveries and innovations, the most important learning is no longer inside of any of the academic disciplines. The most important learning is the bridges between the academic disciplines, interdisciplinary, pandisciplinary, transdisciplinary, but that's not good enough. Because just taking 2 subjects and bridging them is no longer good enough. Taking 3 or 4 subjects and bridging them is no longer good enough. It's not a matter of building bridges between eggs, between having silos and then having diplomacy between the silos. That's no longer good enough. What we are faced with is an all-hands-on-deck crisis that requires a transdisciplinary understanding of the whole thing. And guess what? The only place you're allowed to teach that is in kindergarten. The only place you're allowed to teach the whole thing together is in the first few grades of elementary school. And as it goes further into either an academic direction or a vocational direction, it gets either narrower and narrower to a sub part of a field where you write your thesis on some portion of your thesis advisor's feudal territory. It's feudalistic. The university system is feudalism, and so you narrow into a small part of that feudal system to get your thesis and your degree and so on. In a vocational direction, it's skills-based so that you can be a square peg to fit into a square hole. This is the job that you're going to get out in the world, and here you're being trained for that job. In neither case are you trained, educated, empowered to learn, to become more and more broad, to understand the world in a broader and deeper way. So the only time you got that big, broad picture was in early elementary school. And as an elementary school teacher, You are planting the seeds. You are shaping the curiosity. You get the chance to empower your students that no matter what happens to them in the future grades and the future of their education, to empower them to be a lifelong learner, to understand the whole thing, to always be curious about how everything fits together. And as an educator, today, this week, this month, this year, in the situation you have today, there is nothing more important than to empower your students to think broadly, long-term, see how everything fits together worldwide, and take the largest context and bring it into themselves. To actually be a self-directed learner. As an elementary school teacher and any public school teacher, middle or high school, you get the chance to inspire your students that no matter what the academic requirements, whatever the major they have to pick, or whatever the job they have to get, or any of the institutional requirements, you get a chance to shape them as lifelong learners. And as a visual aid, you'll notice I'm not doing slides. That's very much on purpose. I've done lots of slides and lots of context. I am speaking with my hands on purpose, and there is one visual aid that we will use that symbolizes both of these big ideas. The health and well-being of the whole ecosystem, and also taking that health and well-being, the commitment to the health and well-being, and putting it into yourself, learning, taking that spirit and bringing it into yourself and putting it in your own heart. And that is this visual aid that you can see right here. And if you nod, you can see that what we've got here is green and blue and red. The red is the innermost. Your blood is red. Your heart is red. Red symbolizes the innermost. Blue symbolizes the outermost. The sky and the oceans are blue. Green is the middle between the red and the blue. Green is the color of food. Green is the color of the light that photosynthesis gives off. Green is our goal. That's why we are here hoping for green, aren't we? We're doing green hope. So this symbolizes taking the health and well-being of the outermost and putting it into the innermost. And you see that it also has some letters that say Earth Heart. Putting the health and well-being of the earth in your heart. It also, as you can then see that there are some other letters, and you don't have to stand on your head. I'm going to tell you the secret here. But if you look at the very bottom of this, there's one letter different. There's one letter seated different than all the rest of it. But you can see that it says, hear the art. You can see, heal the art, hear the art, heal the earth heart. There is an L down here. Down at the bottom, there's an L. So there's a heal the earth heart, health, and heal the earth heart, and heal the art, and hear the art. So we've got the art, we've got hearing and music, we've got the health and well-being of the earth. So that's the symbology, that's the one visual aid, so that you can cement into your gray matter these two ideas, the health and well-being of the ecosystem, and the other is empowering your students to be interdisciplinary, to think long-term, worldwide, to see how it all fits together. And in a university environment, the terminology would be to do interdisciplinary synthesis. or transdisciplinary synthesis, holistic synthesis, depending on the constraints that their academic environment imposes upon them. Obviously, as teachers, you are limited by the educational institution and the constraints it puts on you. And so what I've been sharing with you today are the two most important things to take into your constraints and realize you can weave in the health and well-being of the ecosystem into whatever you're doing as an aspiration and as a goal to inspire your students. And then to realize that there are institutional constraints. A lot of educators are not consciously aware. They're just frustrated by the educational context they work in, because the educational context is, in many ways, was never designed for the world we live in today. And in particular, the biggest issue with our educational structure not fitting the demands of the crisis we face is that it breaks people, it makes people consumers, it makes people narrow, square pegs to fit in square holes. There's all those things, but those all are different symptoms of what I'm getting at right here. And when you understand about this drive towards specialization, specialization was what it took to create the Industrial Revolution. You couldn't have a factory unless you factored the work into a whole bunch of specialized occupations, right? That's what a factory is. It factors all this work into a whole bunch of specific jobs. That's what a factory is. That's why it's called a factory. And what training and vocational education has been towards is producing interchangeable parts that can fit into those interchangeable part slots in the factory. That's obsolete. That's not what the world is about in the future. That is still the way the educational system is structured in high school vocational education, in university academic education. But as an elementary school teacher, you have the last hope. You have the last hope to actually change the tide, because you can actually bring everything in. And you can bring it all the way into the health and well-being of them as an individual human being, and mapping that to the whole world, and taking that vision of that whole world being healthy and putting it in their hearts. And then you can feed every different thing into that, whether they're going to do artwork about that, do papers about that, give speeches about that, whether they're going to do biology or chemistry or physics about that, or economics research or social studies. Everything fits into that. And therefore, it can be done at any grade level. Now, having said that, you have these two takeaways. So the promise has been delivered of what I said today's session was about. Now, please turn on your microphones and let's go around, and everybody has a chance to say your name, what you'd like to say about what you do, where you teach if you want. I mean, you don't have to say all these things, but some of the ideas of what you might say are, I teach at this particular level, this age range, or these subjects. Also, what are some of your aspirations? Your aspirations towards ecosystemic health in your own words. Your constraints and frustrations in teaching, and what are the things that may be lacking, or resources that you might desire, questions you have, things you'd like us to talk about. And between both the aspirational and the here and now, shape what you'd like the next hour to be like. And from here on out, The rest of today, after we go around and everybody gets a chance to say what they would like to say, and please don't be shy, and please don't think that you have to keep it totally short. I mean, don't go on for 10 minutes, otherwise everybody won't have a chance to talk. But everybody gets a chance to really say some things, speak yourself, speak your truth, and ask your questions, open up topics. And then we're going to discuss that. And then I'm going to share various responses. And then I have a list of bonus topics for people who want to stick around at the end that, depending on what the interest is, I'm going to focus on more or less on some of those bonus topics. And those who want to stick around after the 2 hours, I'm going to stick around. I believe that the best educators were the ones who stuck around afterwards. And so after the 2 hours, I'm going to stick around until the last person wants to leave, and we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. And so that's how the rest of this is going to go. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick it off, and everybody turn on their microphone, turn on their camera, and whoever wants to go first, start waving.
Hello, I'll go first.
Is that Lizette Diaz de la Vega?
Yes.
What a wonderful name.
Thank you. It's really long.
I have a long 11-letter last name, very, very long, but I like that you have it in multiple pieces. Okay,
Thank you.
tell us all whatever you want to tell us.
Okay, so I'm not employed right now. I did study to be a teacher, and I got my certification, and then I had 3 children all around the same ages, so I decided to be at home.
What ages are those?
Yes, so I have 3 little ones. I did study early childhood, so those are the things that I particularly like to teach. What else can I say? Well, something that in the classroom that I would like to see a change in is if they would incorporate play as an importance for learning. It seems like children are mostly sitting down. There's just so much structure and teaching to the test that I think they took the fun out of learning. And so exploration and just, a lot of students, regardless of their background, they don't get to travel to the world. So, I believe that.
Lizette, your audio, I can tell that a few people are having a difficult time getting your audio quality. If there's anything you can do to improve your microphone, that would be great.
Oh, I'm kind of in a noisy background, but I could also put it in the chat box, but.
No, it's whatever you just did is better. It's better.
Okay.
And I can see one of your little ones there. You're welcome to bring them in as well.
Thank you. Say hi.
Hi.
Lizette, how old are they?
My youngest is 5, and then the middle one is 7, and the oldest is 8.
Did they see this?
Yes.
Do they like this? What do they think about this?
You like it? What is that? It's a logo on the t-shirt. Oh.
It's the earth in a heart. It's nice, right?
See it?
Okay. This is pretty amazing. Everybody who signed up has shown up here. We have our last person arriving. So, very good. Okay, who would like to go next?
Yeah, I can go.
Fernanda is next.
So hi guys, I'm an environmental activist
in my free time. I'm also a graduate student, and I definitely hear and share Howard's frustrations with the current educational model. In a PhD program in biobehavioral health, but there's already an interdisciplinary field, addressing health psychology and people's behaviors and how that connects to their health. But during my time there, I've been told several times to focus more when I have delved into tangent topics like migrant health and like dabbled in topics of immigration, which is clearly like a big issue in our community's health. And, at Penn State, maybe they didn't quite see that and how that's connected. But yeah, it's funny how the educational systems do want us to be as narrow as possible. And I understand that from a scientific standpoint. For us to make research studies, you have to have selected your variables and be very concrete in what you're describing. But also there's just so many factors that you can't control for or measure within people's lives. And I wish we could. So that's the field that I'm delving into. And I haven't been much of an educator. I mean, I've TA'd once, but I look forward to teaching more in the future. And I look forward to hearing your guys' ideas on how to, inspire the youth into really using all that they've learned from the diverse field of knowledge that we have developed as humans, and how to empower them to connect their art to their math and their music to their physics and all of that, and how it can be connected. So happy to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Fernanda. Who's next?
I'll go next. This is Nico. I am a PhD student in biosciences with a concentration in neuroscience. My teaching experience is basically a visual culture class at the undergraduate level, but I may be teaching due to this PhD. I definitely think all disciplines need to be asking the questions about, as Howard said, ecosystemic health. And I guess one of my, maybe not current research interests, but one of my practice interests has been walking, and has been quote unquote park crawling, like going across parks via walking or other methods, preferably the sustainable ones. But I thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Nico. Who wants to go next?
I could go next.
Christina. Welcome, Christina.
Hello, my name is Christina Marin. I am a third grade dual language teacher at Lundy Elementary School. And I hear you. I understand completely. I think our curriculum is definitely lacking in involving children becoming more involved in our ecosystem and recycling. I mean, I always wonder why we don't recycle at our schools. We don't. And then all this food that is thrown away, I always think, I wonder if we can make some kind of a program where we can use that food to possibly, use it as decompose it and just send it back to the earth somehow. It is a loss of a lot of food. There's a few things here and there that we definitely can work at. But there's just a lack of resources. I think that we are so involved in having the kids pass that STAR test, and our priority that's where it goes to. It tends to go to, because we don't have many other resources where we're just focused on getting those kids to pass. So it's hard. It's hard as a teacher. Last year, during the COVID, it happened sort of toward the end of the year, we were planning on making a garden for our school. But that sort of ended after COVID. But we want to start something. Actually, Denise is goes to my school too. And we were thinking of creating something where there's spaces for our children to be able to learn about being healthier, using the earth to create being healthy in mind and spirit. And we're going to have to do that as teachers because it's not part of our curriculum. So we're just going to have to step outside of what's required of us and just do it on our own, basically, is what I'm discovering. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anyone else feels that way if you're teaching.
So Christina and Denise, you're both at Lundy?
Yes.
Yes, I'm at Lundy too. Hi.
I should mention that when I was at Putnam Elementary School more than 50 years ago, more than 1968, 69, I was at Putnam Elementary School, and Mrs. Lundy was our principal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so your school is named after the principal of my elementary school.
Wow.
And I'll have to say, in 1968, we had a debate between, I was Hubert Humphrey, the Democratic nominee, and someone else was Richard Nixon, the Republican nominee. And we had also someone being Edmund Muskie and Spiro Agnew and George Wallace and the Wallaces. So we had all 6 presidential and vice presidential candidates being done by 6th grade students. And we had a debate. And my mother came to the debate and recorded it. And as she was leaving, walking down the hall, she was behind the principal, Mrs. Lundy, and whoever was walking with Mrs. Lundy. And my mother always tells the story that Mrs. Lundy was saying to her friend, well, I don't know whether I'm voting for Humphrey or Nixon, but I'm sure going to vote for Howard Pearlmutter. So I love Mrs. Lundy. She said that wonderful thing that inspired me in my speaking career. So, Christina, thank you for saying that. And I guess, Denise, it's your turn because we're on the subject of Lundy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Denise. Let me turn it down so I don't get feedback. It's nice to see everybody today. Yes, so I've been at Lundy. I've actually been at Putnam too. I don't know if it was, there's a beautiful garden. I don't know when that had started. I don't know if you were there when they started the garden. It's beautiful. So I definitely did take inspiration from that garden at Putnam. When I went to Lundy, I was like, at some point it'd be so cool to have like a student garden like that. And then Christina came up with the idea a couple of years ago, and just like through grants and just kind of like volunteering from the community and stuff, we started. And Christina, I definitely want to continue to support you so we can continue it. But I do remember that you guys had a lovely garden at Putnam. It's beautiful. So, I teach at Lundy. I'm a 4th and 5th grade teacher. I teach language arts and social studies. And so the curriculum that I'm doing, it's supposed to be already like an interdisciplinary curriculum, but I feel like it's not really quite, written that way, or I don't know. I feel like there's a long way to go. It's not quite interdisciplinary. And I feel like the kink in the chain there is, again, just kind of goes back to like the expectations for the tests and just, or other, district pressures, or just, criteria we have to meet. So I feel like that is one of my frustrations, that it's not quite, they say it's interdisciplinary, but at the end of the day, they kind of just disconnect them to meet those like requirements. So it is frustrating. But I would like to see a shift in that. And I think the way you framed it earlier, how it's not it's not about building 2 silos. Like I feel like I'm really gonna have a lot to think about after this session, and just challenge like the way that we have interdisciplinary right now. So,
well, at least Denise, what you're saying is that the people in the positions of power are at least using the words interdisciplinary, whereas 30, 40 years ago they were not. Now they're using the words, but they're not following through on what that really means. But at least they're claiming it is, which is some kind of a progress. But the standardized test does get in the way. Narrowing down to just going for what the test requires, and if the test doesn't require it, then it's an externality, as we say in ecological thinking. Whatever is measured and counted for gets optimized for and supported, and you get more of that. And whatever you don't measure, you don't count, whatever you don't test for gets ignored and not valued. And in economics, if you have a smokestack and you put your smoke out and it falls on farmers' fields in another country, they bear all the cost and you with your smokestack make all the profit. But it doesn't show up on your financial statements. That's an externality. You're getting an unfair advantage that way. And they are having a negative externality show up through no fault of their own. They're having damage to their crops. And on the other hand, say that you're a saint, say you're Mother Teresa, say you're someone who's an environmental activist, say you're putting your body in front of the Keystone XL pipeline. You're a water protector. Nobody's paying you to do that. It doesn't help your bank account. It's taking away from all the other things you need to do in your life. That's the other kind of externality. You're doing good things that are not being rewarded. So if we take it down to almost a Dr. Seuss level, to an elementary level, you could put it like this: doing well by doing good. That's how it works. Or at least it should. So if you make it so that people who do good do well, everything else gets healed. Everything else takes care of itself. If the incentives are to do what's ecosystemically healthy, we've solved the problem. If we can get the incentives in place to reward ecosystemically healthy behavior. So that's a challenge, but at least that is within grasp in the coming years and the next few decades to put that in place. And that is the bridge between the left-wing and right-wing attitudes about how government and economy should work, is to get the prices in the market to tell the truth and to make the pricing mechanisms give the incentives to buy the healthy food, not the junk food, for example. So I'm really happy that we have two people here from Lundy. You both want to do gardens. You want to do garden there. Maybe from seeing some of the other presentations that Candy has put together, you see with earthships, the idea that you can, with a greenhouse, just by covering your garden, you don't even have to build a whole earthship. Even just by having hoops and having a covering, you can potentially make the garden much more successful by making a little greenhouse, for example. And it doesn't cost a lot of money. And potentially, because we got really bright sunlight here, so it will help the plants. So let's continue going around so that everybody else gets a chance to say who they are and where their aspirations are and what their constraints are. And then we'll bring it all together into all the common concerns and common aspirations. So who would like to go next? Judy.
Hi. Yes, I just really appreciate the opportunity to get together like this, that Candace set it up, and Howard for bringing up some great ideas for us to think about. I'm not in a structured classroom. I do take anybody that's interested out into the desert and talk about the things that we have here. And right now, we're having this big party tomorrow. I don't know if everybody's aware that the city passed on Tuesday the conservation conveyance, which is the way to permanently protect lost dog and the NAP land. I'm going to go ahead and put that information in the chat with my email address in case you want to go on a hike yourself. You could just get in touch with me. But my push tomorrow is going to be linking environmental things to politics, because we were able to protect the Knapp land, about 350 acres, Lost Dog, about 1,000 acres, the entire Franklin Mountain State Park. All of those were protected because the people, not with money, not huge celebrities, individual people came together and said this land needs to be protected. This is what democracy looks like. And I'm just inspired by the fact that these things were able to happen. I hope you can come join a celebration tomorrow morning at 9. I put the information in the chat if you'd like more about it, as well as my email. So thanks for this opportunity.
Judy, tell us about your history. You described what you're doing right now. Reach back, what were you doing 20 years ago?
Well, let's see. I retired from the Army after 26 years, and I don't know, what can I tell you? I got people's attention in 07 by stopping the construction of the border wall and getting arrested. And therefore, people know my name. And it has a big impact. When I call somebody, they recognize me, they take my call. So I can tell them, protect this land. I don't recommend you get arrested, but it does work. So I don't know.
So Judy, 1 week from now, there's going to be another session that I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about the last 50 years of my environmental activism and advocacy and stewardship and trusteeship and inspiration for the next generation and for the next 50 years. And things like getting arrested or getting tear gassed are really important war stories. We give all this attention and recognition to military veterans, and you're a military veteran, but you're also an activist veteran, and nobody does anything for activist veterans. You don't get any benefits at all as an activist veteran, even though it's actually, those are the battles on behalf of the earth. So next week, I'm hoping all of you, but I'm inviting you, Judy, let's talk about that next week, because next week is going to be very much about activism and advocacy and looking back 50 years and looking forward 50 years. And today, I'm not making this very much about me. I'm making this about you all and about education. Next week, I'm going to talk about my history and also the inspiration for the future. But it's going to still be consistent with the here and now towards ecosystemic health, which is what today is about. So thank you, Judy. Appreciate it. Congratulations. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
One little thing that you could all do right now to help protect the environment is to sign electronically the e-letter for Kasner Range. I put that in the chat too. So you can share that with family and friends and help protect another 11 square miles in Northeast El Paso.
Thank you, Judy. Okay, we still have Candy and Cindy and Diana. So
I'll go next. I'll go next.
Cindy.
Yeah, first I'd like to thank Judy for everything she's doing, and thank Candy for everything she's doing, because one of the things I'm doing now is just trying to support Candy with, because I just think she's wonderful with all the outreach she does and all the people she connects, and it's a huge job. So right now it's just one of my things to do is just to help support her.
Yeah, Cindy feeds me.
And so I was I was an elementary school educator and school librarian for 31 years. And I always just tried to teach about the environment wherever I could slip it in. You know, it's always hard as educators. And as a librarian, they don't stick to standards like they do with teachers. I'll show them the state standards and they'll say, oh, those are recommendations. So that gave me some freedom to do some things. I know there's a librarian in Socorro that she has her students go into the Sierra Club, Mesa Hardin, and then so anyway, I was able to have some flexibility in the library, and I know there's some librarians that have had gardens. When I retired, I became a master gardener, and I know in EPISD, you have Simon Chandler. He's community and schools. He's on our youth outreach committee for school gardens, and he's a huge resource. One of the mistakes people do with school gardens is they take so long to plant them, and then in the spring, they plant tomatoes, cucumbers, watermelon, and then they're gone in the summertime when harvest happens. And in El Paso, this is one of the biggest things we teach as master gardeners with the growing season. El Paso's best growing season is actually the school year. If you'll plant lettuce in October, you'll have lettuce the whole entire school year. You'll have parsley, you'll have rosemary, so these are a lot of things that, like Simon, if you're an EPI, get a hold of Simon Chandler. I don't even know what campus he's on, but I know he's worked with the Bowie Gardens. And so he's a great resource for the EPISD. We did work with a group in Isleta ISD at Presa Elementary, and it was the school counselor there that had a pergola built, and he wanted help putting in a garden. And the spring garden, the same thing. You had to have parents water in the summer. It didn't work well. The following year, we were going to do a winter garden, but then he got transferred. And so you have all the other dynamics of the schools. I know in EPISD, we've done some after-school programs, but I think right now your best bet is Simon Chandler, because he's on our youth outreach committee. Oh, I adore him. And he and I did, and Allison, who's in charge of it, did a little outreach to North Loop Elementary. It was a little Zoom, just more about what Master Gardening does, but he's a genius. So, and then the other thing that I've tried to do is, this is a little off topic, but I teach Sunday school, and I believe that if we believe God created the earth, that we should be stewards of the earth. And I know, like, I would teach Sunday school, so I would always bring my own plates, these little, nice plastic, not single use, but plates I could use over and over and over for snack. And I would tell the kids, I'm doing this so we're not using styrofoam, we're not using single use plastic. Well, now with the pandemic, I can't even bring anything in. I haven't even taught. I'm supposed to go back to teaching in June. In June, everything's been put in, a Ziploc bag, which they get that week, and then everything's like sterilized for the next week. And there's been so more styrofoam being used, so many more water bottles being used because just because of the pandemic, the nature of the pandemic. And so I'm always trying to, and then just always trying to give gifts of a bar of shampoo, or a bar of or bees wrap, or have our gift giving be environmental things, and positive advocate, but still have that energy to do what we can. So I'm like a lot of you, I do what I can, but I really wish I could do more. And when I find somebody like Candy that's doing more, I want to support her. And so that's where I am.
Thank you, Cindy. So, all right. I think Candy and Diana have not spoken yet. Diana, do you want to go next?
Sure, I'll go next. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my name is Diana Duran. I'm an innovative technology support teacher at Isleta Middle School. And I teach 2 STEM classes, and the rest of the day I'm a support to students and teachers. And I have actually started a garden at our middle school, and that was probably about 4 years ago. And we actually had 2 gardens. We had a vegetable garden, and then in the front of the school, I used one of the flower beds as a pollinator garden, which I had won as a grant, and they sent me plants, which I was like so happy about. And so we planted it at the end of the school year, and I had students coming in the summer twice a week helping me water and weed both gardens. And so we had a change of administration, and the new principal tore out my pollinator garden. Yes.
That's horrible.
I know. So I quit. I quit after that because I put so much work into it that I even missed work because I was so angry for about 3 days, and I didn't want to say anything that would make me lose my job. So he did apologize, afterwards once he realized what he had done. And it was just...
Are you telling me that they did that without knowing what they were doing?
Well, according to him, he didn't know. But when I met him, we were watering the garden at the front of the school with students in the summer. So I don't know how he could have forgotten that, we had just planted those plants, and then he just had maintenance come and clean everything out, and then they filled it up with rocks. Yeah. Which they ended up taking out anyway because the kids were throwing them at each other. So, like my garden was killed for nothing. But anyway, I still have a passion for the environment and for growing our own food. And I think it's important that we know what's in our food, because nowadays we don't. And my theory is that, we have so much cancer now because we're not eating well. And, Cesar Chavez was, telling us back in the 70s that, the pesticides that they're spraying on the food isn't good for us. And, it's still happening to this day. So that's just my theory. I feel it's connected because there's so many more people with cancer now than when I was little, that there has to be some kind of connection. But
Diana, you froze just after the word "but."
Also an environmentalist. Can you hear me?
Diana, could you back up 2 sentences because you froze?
Oh.
Just back up 2 sentences.
I don't even remember what I said 2 sentences ago.
All right, then keep going.
Okay, so I'm also an environmentalist. An environmental advocate, I would say. So, at my school, they know me as the environmentalist, and, don't make too many copies in front of Miss Duran. She'll tell you something. So, I do feel that the schools should be models of, being good stewards to the earth. And like what Christina was saying is like, we should be doing more in the schools, and we're not. Even the supplies that we get, the vendors that we purchase from, we should be making sure that they're practicing sustainability. Why are we giving our money to them to continue abusing, our earth? And so, like, for example, I'm the technology support teacher, so I'm in charge of all the Chromebooks that the students use. And so we bought new Chromebooks, and there's so much styrofoam in the packaging. And I'm thinking, like, why are we buying from this vendor? So I make it a point to buy from vendors who don't use too much, but it's kind of hard to know, like, what they're going to send it in. So once you open up, a new model, then what they're going to do. Lenovo's are very good, guys. So if your school needs to order Chromebooks, Lenovo's use cardboard for everything. So, and then speaking of that, I just built my mom a raised garden and in her backyard, and it's pretty tall because she has a bad knee, so I needed to make it tall. So I used all those cardboard boxes from those Chromebooks, and I filled in the raised bed because I needed material, and I couldn't buy all the soil. This is way too expensive. So anyway, this, workshop caught my eye because I want to go back to teaching environmental courses. And my kind of dream is, because I'm also practicing part part of the Texas Master Naturalist group here in El Paso. And so I've attended a lot of workshops and about the environment, about our water sources, and hydrology is a big interest of mine. So I kind of want to put together a sort of like an environmental club, summer club kind of thing, and, you know, show all the students or kids everything that I've learned. I've lived in El Paso my whole life, and I didn't know, you know, we had a dam, you know, on the border that separates the water that, you know, from Mexico and the United States, you know, and it forms the Franklin Canal. And, you know, there's just so much, you know, and how we get our own water source and, you know, how it's treated and stuff. So, and how the city is, I think they're already in the works of buying water from another town in Texas because our resources aren't enough for our growing city. But yet we want more people to come and live here. So I don't know. It's just like, I don't think our city government is really focused on our environment and what resources can sustain the people that we have now. And I think we need, you know, everybody involved, and I think they need to listen. And I was in a session earlier with the Sunrise movement, and, you know, they speak to everything that you know, I feel is going wrong here. And I'm hoping that, you know, we go in the right direction, but it's kind of discouraging because a lot of people don't care. And that's what's frustrating for me.
Diana, you brought up a lot of really, really important points, a lot of really, really good things, and I think you brought together a number of items. You brought together the gardening that Christina and Denise have been talking about. You brought together the activism that Judy is talking about. You talked about how you work within the structures and in the institutional structure, like Cindy was talking about. You really brought a lot together. And also, since you mentioned about the computers, the Chromebooks, the Lenovo's, and that you're a STEM educator and you're an innovation coordinator, everything I do is under the phrase creative technology for healthy ecology. Technology, digital technology, information technology gives us the potential that is missing in most environmental thinking. It's frustrating and hopeless, and it's an unending battle, and you plant a garden and then some stupid person tears it out. Or we don't seem to be making progress. The problems seem to be getting bigger and worse faster than we're doing anything about them. The thing in the 1980s, you know, you remember Time Magazine used to have the Man of the Year. Eventually they moved to the Person of the Year. But along the way, in the 1980s, they had the front cover in 1984 being the Machine of the Year, the Computer of the Year, the Personal Computer. And in 1988, they had the Planet of the Year, our endangered planet. And in the 1980s, this juxtaposition, here you have this, you know, the front cover was like this artistic rendering of the Earth, kind of wrapped in garbage on a beach. It's kind of like the imperiled, embattled Earth. The problem that can't be solved, the unsolvable problem of what about the Earth? But there was also, 4 years earlier, there was the personal computer. And I realized back in the 1980s that if we take the unstoppable force of digital technology and the things that go around with that, it's an unstoppable force, and apply it to the unsolvable problem of the health and well-being of our ecosystem, now we don't have to be frustrated. So, Diana, I want to say that because when we have, you know, one of the famous sayings in the environmental movement is think globally, act locally. And as an educator, the problem is we're normally being forced to thinking locally and acting locally. to deal with just putting out the fires or just dealing within the local constraints, or even the local environmental issues. And I don't want to stop anybody from working on local environmental issues. I want to inspire educators, however, to be working on the global big picture so that every student leaves their educational experiences with the big picture, so that no matter where they go or what they do, they see the relevance. If you focus your students on a local issue or a specific environmental problem, and that's not their cup of tea, it might not sit with them for the rest of their lives. If you prepare your students for the big future, the jobs of the future are in STEM or STEAM. That is a really potent set of tools and forces to apply to ecosystemically positive outcomes at the local level, at every level. Right? From the health of the whole ecosystem all the way down to parts of the ecosystem. Our bodies are ecosystems. Our organs, our cells, the health of our cells, the health of our organs, the health of our bodies. We're talking about cancer. We have this unhealthy, toxic interplay, and it isn't just that Mother Earth is sick. It's the inhabitants of Mother Earth are sick. Look at all the pieces of plastic that the fish are swallowing. It all has to be seen as a system. We have to see how everything fits with everything else. And remember, when you do something small, like say you do some artwork that wakes people up, inspires them, that's good. That's not enough. And so my message to all of you is the environmental movement has been very much about people like us doing everything we can and hoping it's enough, and generally being frustrated. All right? And I am taking us to another level. Not all of us, but some of us to another level. And that other level is to seeing what needs to be done and then backing up to figure out how to build the tools, to build something that goes exponentially, like a seed becomes a tree that can actually be big enough to address the whole issue of restoring the health and well-being of the ecosystem. If you have a student and they are so committed to doing something like getting to the moon, and you are their PE teacher and you set up a high vault with a pole vaulting, and every day they pole vault and they get a quarter-inch higher and a quarter-inch higher, and eventually, they go 19 feet, 20 feet, 21 feet, and they're improving and they're dedicated. They're never going to get to the moon. No matter how committed they are, they're never going to get to the moon. They could become a great athlete and win the Olympics, but they're never going to get to the moon. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be an athlete. I'm not saying they shouldn't win the Olympics. And I'm also saying that if you back up and say, you want to get to the moon? If you want to get to the moon, design a rocket ship. And if they say, how do I do that? Well, learn astrophysics, learn propulsion, learn about aerodynamics, learn about gravity, and now they have a goal of getting to the moon that drives their motivation and curiosity. And they say, well, how do I learn all those things? Well, study the physics. And then you work backwards to now they're motivated. So I'm going to take everything you've all said, and then I want to have Candy have her chance before we go into the rest of today. But this is a magic moment that I want to inspire you all with. Most education is based on teaching elementary, basic things, and then more advanced and more advanced. Remember, I was talking about general to specific. But there's another issue that goes alongside that. And that is, in order to learn the basics, you have to start with the basics, right? And then once they learn that, you can teach them the next level and the next level. And over the course of their elementary, middle school, high school, university, and so on, they can go to higher and higher and higher levels. That's the way it's supposed to work. The problem in terms of the pedagogical and psychological issues is that the motivation works in reverse. Now, the entire educational system was not designed around the students' passions, right? Have any of you seen any educational structure built around what the students are passionate about and designing the curriculum around their passions? You're all, gee, well, there are some extracurriculars, but in general, the answer is no. Now,
I wish.
Yes, I wish. Well, here's the thing. What I urged you to do today is to inspire and empower and plant the seed for ecosystemic health with your students. Get them passionate about ecosystemic health. Then they become lifelong learners and they become magnets. Now, if you think about education as driven by the passion and the goals and the dreams, and that students are very impressionable early on. Oh, I want to be a fireman. I want to be a fireman. I want to be a ballerina. These were planted by previous generational media and relatives, ancestors as, oh, you want to be that, and then they go through life doing somebody else's dream. We need all hands on deck for the next 100 years. We need to get students to early on have the dream of saving the world, except that's not a good way of thinking about it. We need them because they're going to run out of runway if they want to change the world. They're going to try to be a superhero and their life's going to crash and burn because you can't save the world. But what you can do is you can work on healing the ecosystem at many different levels, in many different ways, in many different approaches. And if you think big, think globally about healing the ecosystem, then that will say, well, how do I get there? What kind of rocket ship do I need to learn how to build to be able to do that? What tool do I need to build to be able to do that? And then they work backwards, and now they're super motivated. This is the secret for motivating your students and healing the ecosystem. Working backwards from the future and having that long-term motivation. All right? Now, Candy, please share. Candy organized this whole summit series. Very wonderful. And now, Candy, as an individual, as you yourself, introduce yourself, share with us. You get to swim in. You've been creating the swimming pool for everybody to swim in. Now you get to dive into this swimming pool.
Well, first I want to say that I definitely did not do this by myself. I think I would have a breakdown if it was just me. But I mean, even people on this call, Howard, Judy, Cindy, not to mention the Green Hope Project board members, Zulema and Darlene Aguirre, Zulema Macias. There's so many people. I mean, yeah, it's just not me, but thank you guys. So I'm Candace Prince. I taught high school art for 15 years at El Dorado High School and Socorro ISD. The year I got promoted to assistant director of fine arts for the district was the year the kids, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to miss you. I'm going to go. And they were like, don't leave. And I was like, the world's not going to end. And they were like, and then COVID hit and the kids were like, you lied. Like everything shut down. And I was like, oh my gosh. So me adjusting from being an educator to going to the director has not been normal at all. So I feel like I'm still kind of trying to figure things out. I'm very happy with my current position, although I do miss the kids because they made me feel younger. They made me laugh all the time, even though they drove me crazy sometimes. They kept me going, you know what I mean? I mean, all their crazy ideas, and I'm like, yeah, let's do that. You know? And so, but I feel like I'm very happy to be in a position where I can help other educators, whether it be training or grant writing. I think that's the time in my life that I needed to change. And so, and then Green Hope Project actually was built from the high school art kids meeting after school saying, why is our Chihuahuan desert so polluted? This is disgusting. And we had a club called It's Your World Project. And that's how Green Hope happened, because eventually they were graduating and they still wanted to help. And I said, you guys, you can't just hang around the school like creepers. Like, you always wanted to leave and you graduated and you keep coming back. So we thought, well, okay, let's go ahead and start a nonprofit. There seems to be a need. And so I have an art background. And so Green Hope Project focuses on art, education, and environmentalism. I know enough to know that I don't know everything. And so I know that I'm okay with the arts, but I do not know the science. So I surround myself with smart science people. And so just a couple things, and I won't go long because I do want to hear Howard more than I want to hear myself. I took a couple notes when you guys were talking, and so I know what it's like to feel overwhelmed with the burden of everything that's happening in the world, whether it be animals, plants, human beings, environmental justice issues, you being concerned with your own health, you being just jaded by all the like hypocrisy and greed in the world. I understand what it is. But I also know that when I see your faces in this meeting and hear your voices, I know I'm not alone in it. And that gives me hope that there's a yin to the yang, that there's like a balance. There's a light to that darkness that drives me crazy and wants me to give up. But I see you guys and you keep me going. And I think that we're all connected and everything is connected in some way. So although I don't do math, science, English, history, or all that, I do know that there's a bigger picture. And like, if you, like you're saying, if you want to teach to the whole kid, we all have a place. And I think that we need to unite together to be stronger instead of being isolated and feeling like we're alone. And I think that's what Howard's going to get at and what he is getting at in his next session. So I do hope you register for his other one. And so, you know, I mean, maybe some of the solutions to the issues in the education system is us getting together later and creating environmental steering committees on the campuses and urging the school board members to make change and putting pressure on the superintendents. And maybe we do that within our districts, or maybe we do that within the city. I think both would be great. So that probably means we need to get together at some point after this. Curriculum writing. We are seeking, Green Hope Project is seeking educators to help us write curriculum. I don't care what discipline you're in. We would like to pay you. We have a grant. So if you can offer your feedback, Diana, Denise, Christina, I see you, Lizette, I see you. The best way to find out about that call for educators to help with curriculum is sign up for our newsletter. We're going to put information out after the summit. It's just too much for me to handle everything at once. We would like to pay you to help write environmental curriculum for all disciplines, because educators are too busy and too overwhelmed with what you have said is the testing, that they don't have time to write quality environmental curriculum for their disciplines. And we want to make it free for everybody and put it out there. So that's one way you can help. And you know, Diana, don't get discouraged. Denise, Christina, don't get discouraged. Lizette, don't get discouraged with ripping up your gardens. Let's use that as a metaphor. Because you are planting those seeds, they will come back. Those seeds will come back. And those kids that did that stuff with you in the summer, who knows what they're going to carry with them later. Do you know what I mean? That's not all for naught. You know what I mean? And so it'll come back around. And next year's summit, we'd love to have it in person. We want to have like music and catering and parties, and we want you guys to meet each other in person and share ideas, because I think that's where this is happening, is on the level where we're just hanging out and getting to know each other. And so the last thing I want to say is we are also doing something called Precious Plastic, where we would like to build machines that grind and shred plastic, heat it, mold inject it, and turn it into other items. And so we're creating these machines right now. It's open source. You can type in Precious Plastic and see what I'm talking about. Rather than these things end up in landfills. And, you know, sometimes the recycling doesn't get recycled, guys. It breaks my heart, but it just doesn't. And so I'd like these items to really become phone cases, playgrounds, backsplashes, you know, chairs, tables, park benches. And so that's coming down the road. So stay in touch with us for that. But definitely sign up for the newsletter. And Howard, you are amazing at public speaking. Thank you so much. And this is motivating me, and meeting you guys is motivating me. So please sign up for the newsletter. I'd love to stay in touch with you.
Thank you, Candy. So now everybody has had a chance to introduce themselves and say what they'd like to say, and it is my job to synthesize what everybody has said and then weave it into the bonus topics. And of course, anybody who has to leave is leaving. So of course, you're free to leave if you have to leave, and stay if you can. Diana, I see you waving, but I hope you can stay a little bit longer, but if you can't, hopefully there'll be more chances. But before the people who have to go, I want to say a couple of the quickest of the bonus topics. And then there's more for people who can stay longer. So the first one is, if we're not yet connected on LinkedIn, please send me an invitation and just mention this session, and I'll be sure to accept your invitation. So I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. Please connect up on LinkedIn. Secondly, next week, I've given you a bit of a preview about next week, about inspiring future generations and tidbits from the last 50 years. And I have a lot of different things that I'm going to cover next week, I'm going to touch on, but a few of them are ranging from how I was at the Earth Summit in 1992 in Brazil, or how I spoke at the first ever worldwide gathering of the people who created intentional communities, the Federation for Intentional Community. I was a speaker at the first ever worldwide gathering. How Wavy Gravy and David Brower played personal influential roles in my life. How I met Buckminster Fuller. How I've been tear gassed and how I've been arrested in environmental activism. How, you know, and all kinds of other things I'm going to talk about next week. So no matter what your dimensional slice on all of this activism and advocacy and trusteeship and stewardship is, there'll be something for you next week. Now, but then also next week, I'm going to be talking about a lot of the things I've created or instigated over the years. You notice I haven't, except for this that I'm wearing, I haven't done anything about what I personally have brought into the world, and I'm going to do that a lot more next week. But I would like to say, especially while Diana is still here, before you run away, Diana, that the best-selling educational software of 1983, 84, and 85, I personally was on the team that wrote it, and I also started the company that had the team that created that software. And that the person who came to us, who had the idea and the prototype, he became a millionaire because of what we did. And so it's called Master Type, and it was the first ever fast action video game that was also educational. So it was the first time that a fast action video game was also educational software. And you're being attacked by spaceships, outer space things, and you have to type their names, type their words, and if you type them before they hit your flying saucer, a wizard jumps out and zaps them. This is 1983 on the IBM PC, and 1984 when the first 100 products shipped on the brand new Macintosh. It was bestseller on PC and Mac. And a few years before that, I gave an international tour in Europe, in Israel, and Austin, and Texas, different places around the world. And it was called Learning Tools. Learning Tools. When you think about the phrase learning tools, it has multiple meanings. And the first meaning that's most obvious is learning about tools. That's educational. It should be in our curriculum. Why is there not a subject like history or social studies or PE or science, why don't we have tools? Because we all work with tools, including the phones. You know, we have these mobile phones that, you know, that's a tool, but we don't have a subject called tools. So learning about tools is important. Another meaning of learning tools is tools that help us learn, like educational software. Books are learning tools, right? And tools that help educators educate their students, such as like video conferencing platforms like we're on right now. And there's many, when you start thinking about it, there's all kinds of tools that educators can help students learn with, and learners can use to help them learn more. Tools that help you gather and learn knowledge, like, for example, search engines are a great way. You know, the current generation is native in, they want to learn something, boom, they search and they start devouring the knowledge until, oh, I got that, and they go on to the next thing. And so that's a second meaning of learning tools. Of course, I was talking about this in 1980, 81, long before Google got founded and stuff like that, right? The third meaning of learning tools, which is the last one I'm going to go into right now, is tools which are able to learn. Tools which are able to learn. Well, what does that mean? Well, all the machines of the industrial age, you know, they are manufactured to do what they do, and they do it. The computer was the first and the basis for many. It's the machine that can be reprogrammed. It's a machine that can be taught to do different things depending on what software you load into it. But for a computer to learn and for the software to learn from the user of the software, we had to go to a higher level. So just like computers learn so hardware gets programmed by software. Hardware gets programmed by software, so that's how the computer hardware learns, is by having the software loaded. It'd be so nice as an educator if you could just open their brain, put it in, close the brain, and close their head, but it doesn't work like that, right? But the next level of learning tools is when the software and the hardware learn from the user, or learn later after the software has been programmed. Nowadays, we call that deep learning in the AI world. And that's like where all these jobs are going to be, is in deep learning, neural networks, artificial intelligence. Cutting edge of the STEAM curriculum, you know, artificial intelligence. Well, I think that artificial intelligence is a horrible phrase for this, because it's not artificial and it's not really intelligence, but it is a form of learning. Machine learning is a reasonable phrase, but it's not the machine that's learning, it's the software that's learning. The hardware learns by software being loaded, but the software learns through these mechanisms that people call neural networks and machine learning and so on. So that's the third meaning of learning tools. Back in 1981, I had 8 meanings. I've forgotten most of them, but those are the 3 that are most important. So, as an educator, as a modern enlightened educator, we realize that it isn't about us jamming the knowledge into their brain. The enlightened education is empowering and inspiring the student to become a learner and to do the learning. So, learning tools, leverage. And so I now want, as the next bonus topic, I want to plant a seed. I have never heard this anywhere else. Of course, I haven't looked for it very much. But I want to plant this seed for further conversation. It, you know, could easily lead to it could be a whole conference on just this subject, but I just want to mention this, and in a few minutes when we go back into interactive mode, if this is what you all want to talk about, because this is one of the things I'd like your feedback on. So as I was saying earlier, that The problem with the educational system, especially the universities, is it gets narrower and narrower and narrower as you go further in academia. And that is destroying the ecosystem, because it means that the people who control the institutions have been trained in narrow specialty disciplines. Whereas what we need is the people who have the most power to have the most breadth of understanding and knowledge, and to see how everything fits together. Plus, instead of a few people having a lot of power, we need to have more people having more decentralized power, and all those people need to have a bigger, broader understanding so that they make the right votes, they do the right community and civic engagement. So everybody needs to be able to understand the bigger picture. So imagine the model. I've just described the model of four-year, university academia getting narrow. Imagine another model into the side of it that is still possible today. So you have, elementary school, you still have that possibility. You still have that possibility in elementary school for that general holistic inspiration, right? And then as they go through middle school and high school, now they've got a social studies teacher and a science teacher. Maybe they have a physics teacher versus a biology teacher versus a chemistry teacher. It gets somewhat specialized. STEAM brings some of it back together, which is good. Doesn't bring all of it back together, but it's on the way. STEAM is on the right direction. But imagine when someone goes to a community college, which might become, with the Biden administration, might become universal. Imagine that there's a new idea of community college grad school. After you graduate from community college with a skill set, you get a 2-year degree and you know how to do plumbing. Let's say that you learn to be a plumber in community college. Now you go into community college grad school and you become someone who understands about hydrologic cycles, water recycling, living machines, as new alchemy pioneered in the 1970s, which led to the Earthship idea of the water cycles, for example, that we've been hearing about from the Earthship people in the series here. But those were pioneered at New Alchemy Institute in Massachusetts in the 1970s. And they were called living machines. And in a film that I did the animation for called Ecological Design Inventing the Future, there's a whole chapter about living machines. And as a plumber who has a skill and can make a living, what if the next level out is to really understand a more holistic context centered around plumbing, but see the whole world and what you can do for the world through your plumbing skills? Or you got an electrician degree, a 2-year electrician degree. But now you learn about photovoltaics, you learn about batteries, you learn about electric vehicles, you learn about electricity and electrical and electronics and digital and analog and power, and now you're not just an electrician. In other words, imagine a community college grad school that broadens people holistically. All right, so there's an idea to talk about. The next thing on the bonus list. Talk about curriculum. Imagine a worm farm in the classroom. Imagine you have inside the room, you have between glass, you have the growing medium, and you have a bunch of earthworms, and the students can actually see the worms between the glass, right? And this was given out to teachers by a company called TerraCycle. And I was on the board of advisors at the beginning of the creation of TerraCycle. Or let's put it this way, I was one of 3 people who was on the inaugural board of TerraCycle almost 20 years ago. Now, if you go into your Walgreens or your CVS and you look at your toothpaste or you look at your shampoo or you look at a bunch of the bottles there, you might see a logo that looks like an infinity with, it's green, and at the ends it has arrows. So it's kind of like an S on the side. It looks like an infinity, but it has green arrows. You'll start noticing it because it's on all kinds of packaging. It's on lots of non-recyclable packages. TerraCycle has waste rescue brigades that actually have collected over 2 billion pieces of non-recyclable waste and upcycle it. TerraCycle has had not 1 but 2 television series on cable TV. The first series was called Garbage Moguls. And Candy, this is right up your alley. Garbage Moguls. TerraCycle's Garbage Moguls every week was a new challenge, a new waste stream of a new kind of packaging. And them going through, it's a reality TV show about the designers thinking about this new kind of waste and what can we do with it so it doesn't become waste, so we can eliminate this. So one episode, for example, was they were paid by Target. What do we do with those Target bags when they're not being used anymore? You know, they have that red bullseye kind of logo on white plastic bags. And so you see this whole episode of how the designers at TerraCycle designed luggage, beautiful, useful, functional luggage woven out of these plastic bags. And so the Garbage Mogul series was all like that. Then they have another series that they did called Human Resources. So anyway, so TerraCycle gave worm farms to teachers. Now, there's a little bit of a story, and now that we're losing some of the people, I'm going to tell a little longer stories because hopefully the people who are left are the people who are hardcore. So here's the TerraCycle story. I have lots and lots of stories, more than could fit, so I'm being selective about which story, but this is one that relates to educators, relates to garbage and recycling, and it relates to art and craft. And so I know, so Candy, you haven't heard this story from me before, so I'm going to tell you this, and hopefully everybody else can stick with it. So I just come back from 5 years overseas. That's a whole bunch of stories that I'm not going into right now. I've been away from the Americas for 5 years. And in the first week that I came back, I was on the East Coast where my father lives now and was living then. This is back in the early 90s. I'm sorry, the early 2000s. And a friend of mine who worked in the Clinton White House and later on was in the Obama transition team, was a law school professor, and his thesis advisor was the teacher for a course I took called Technology and Social Change, which you can see is very relevant here. And that teacher was his thesis advisor, and my friend Peter became a law school professor, became one of the world's top lawyers on the law of information and privacy and environmental and banking and a bunch of other law. But he was in the Clinton administration, the Clinton White House. He was the chief counselor for privacy. He was the main guy for HIPAA, for example, in the executive branch. And he came and picked me up at my dad's place and took me to Princeton. This is the first week after being away from the United States for 5 years. And he took me there 2 days before the reunions. And the reason we went 2 days early was because Peter was going to give a speech. Peter was on a panel, an all-day conference of lawyers and diplomats and public servants at the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton, the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. It's the only major, undergraduate major at Princeton you have to apply to after you've been admitted to Princeton. You have to apply again to get into the Woodrow Wilson School. These are the most competitive people you'd ever meet. If you imagine, hundreds of Hillary Clinton clones all, competing to get into the Woodrow Wilson School, which is your pathway to being a senator or a diplomat or, those kind of people, right? And in fact, the dean of it, Louise Slaughter, I think, was like Hillary Clinton's right-hand woman before that. So these are people who are well-meaning. These are people who want to do good stuff. And while I was an undergraduate, as a freshman, I was allowed to audit a course in the Woodrow Wilson School about the computer models, the world's first computer models of ecosystems, of food, pollution, natural resources, population, that were done in the early 1970s. And they came out in a book called Limits to Growth. And before that, the first one was called The World Model. World Dynamics was the name of the book, if you're interested in World Dynamics. And then the bestseller came after that was called Limits to Growth, early 1970s. And while I was a student here in El Paso, I discovered those books. I discovered the Limits to Growth computer models. And it showed the human population exponentially rising and then collapsing between 2020 and 2040. But this was in the 1970s that they were predicting this. And there were all these different scenarios. Well, what if we have half as much pollution or find twice as much resources? Well, actually, the problem gets worse. The population grows even more and collapses even worse. Only by coming into balance with the ecosystem of having slower population growth, less use of resources, less pollution, better ways of dealing with food and capital and like, do we come into long-term survival on the planet? And I saw this while I was a junior at Coronado High School here in El Paso. And I dedicated my life to that. And next week, if I can find them, I'm going to show you 2 articles from the El Paso Times from 1974 and 1975 while I was a student here in El Paso. And in both of them, I am saying that I'm dedicating my life to improving on these models so that our leaders can make better decisions. Within 5 years, I realized we are the leaders. The leaders have too many vested interests controlling them, and they're too stuck. And that's we can talk about that next week as well. So after I got into Princeton and Stanford and MIT, so since you're all educators, this is all like, oh, that's the goal, right? You want to get into these great schools. I turned down a 4-year scholarship from a Midwestern university. I turned down all kinds of things. I even turned down Stanford and MIT because I just wanted to go back to Princeton, where my family had moved from when I was 10 years old. We moved from Princeton to El Paso. I just wanted to go back. Long story short, I ran out of money the first year, had to come back to El Paso and start my own business. Then I got to work on supercomputers for NASA. I'll tell you about that next week. Went back to Princeton and I got thrown out. I got expelled because I took a 60s radical approach saying we have to do interdisciplinary synthesis. I refused to pick a major, saying I want to study everything and how it all fits together. All right, so there is a history behind the things I'm sharing with you today. There's there's books I could write about what I briefly shared with you earlier today. There's a lot of story behind it. But Princeton says you don't have to graduate to come to reunions. As long as you matriculate, you're part of that class forever. So I love reunions. And also I met great people who became lifelong friends, like Peter Swire, who worked, like I said, in both the Clinton and the Obama administrations. And even today, he's a worldwide guru on the questions of digital privacy. And so we went to the Woodrow Wilson School. And to finish up that, from freshman year, to go back to freshman year, I got to audit a course in world dynamics, in systems of world orders, what it was called, by this very enlightened professor in the politics department at Princeton who taught these courses at the Woodrow Wilson School. And as a freshman, he let me audit it, but it was full of all these grad students, these Woodrow Wilson School grad students, who were economists, political scientists, historians, all these hardcore social science grad students in the Woodrow Wilson School. So these are like alpha, hardcore, and there's, dozens of them in this course. And in this one, and I audited the course, but in this one session, the professor set up a debate. And it was me against all the other students. Luckily, it was me and the professor against all the other students. The professor was keeping it somewhat even, but he backed me up because he knew that I was right and the rest of the students were not. So I'm a freshman, they're grad students, right? And the debate was over the world models. The limits of growth stuff I was talking about. And they were all coming from their specialty. Well, it doesn't do good economics. Or, oh, Candy, you're about to leave. Right, everybody turn your microphone back on. Everybody turn your microphone back on. Right, so first of all, I want to thank you for sticking it out this long. Secondly, I wanted to say, I just want you to realize that I only got into the big story way at the end. Luckily, I didn't do this kind of thing at the beginning. I would have lost everybody. Next week, I'm going to tell you all more story. But today, we're in the bonus topics. And I basically was telling you the story of how I met the founders of TerraCycle there at Princeton the next day, and how I was invited to be the advisor of TerraCycle. And how TerraCycle has provided a way that schools can raise money. And so that's a whole subject we can talk about. There's a whole bunch of things that all connects, and the whole TerraCycle story relates here. Candy, thank you very much for sticking it out through the whole session.
Thank you.
Organizing and creating the content for all this. And you're going to be, you're going to hold the space for the one next week, right?
I'm going to.
And Denise and Christina, are you going to come next week?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So here's what I'd like. Denise, you can unmute. All right. So let me just do this. I know Candy has to go, but before Candy goes, Christina, Denise, either one. Oh, Lizette is still here and Nico is still here. Okay, so we do have a few more people. I will stay till the last person leaves. And I can also make this more interactive, and I can go less or more in depth about some of these subjects. So I want to say goodbye to Candy, but I don't want to chase everybody else away. So
Yeah.
Candy, thank you. This
Thank
is a great format. I really appreciate you. I appreciate
Thank you, Howard, for your expertise. You know so much more than I know, so I'm grateful that you're doing all the talking and I'm not, because I haven't lived through what you have. And I was saying, everybody's been arrested but me. What the heck? I'm slacking it here. I feel like I need to be more of a fighter. But you know what? Without you guys attending, this would not matter as much. So thank you for taking that effort to educate yourselves and be a part of a community that I think we so greatly need. And then on that note, Howard, I know we do have educators seeking CPE credit. If there is any way in Google Meet to download an attendance, if you could get me that. I know sometimes before the meeting ends, you might have to grab that attendance. So if you could check that out before you end the session.
Well, Candy, everybody who signed up, except for Jennifer, I saw them here.
Yeah, if there's a way to do that in a document in Excel through Google Meet, if you could download that, there might be an option in the settings.
I don't know if that exists.
Okay. If you poke around before you leave, if you happen to find it, let me know. If not, I have the recording, so we're good.
You have the recording, and I just took a screenshot of the people who are left.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Okay. Very good, Candace. I'll see you next week. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Hi, Candy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we are, and Nico disappeared too. So we're down to Lizette, Christina, and Denise. So before I say any more, I've gone about a third of the way through the bonus topics, and I got into that deeper dive into the TerraCycle, Princeton, El Paso to Princeton in a cycle. Of all the things I've said on bonus topics and all things we talked about earlier, which are the things you'd like me to focus on the most for the rest of the time before you all have to leave?
I personally have to leave like in maybe within the next 10 minutes, but I would like to see how we as educators can actually get into helping teaching our students how to become involved, not just like through curriculum writing, but also through programs, and something where we are actually, instead of always complaining, we don't recycle, what do we do with our food? Like, can we actually do something that like action? You know, I'm ready for the action part of this now.
Okay. Great. Christina, I'm going to jump right into that, except I just want to ask Denise, what would you like me to focus on?
Honestly, because Christina and I kind of like on the same talk, and I'm sorry, I won't be able to stay that long either, but I think Christina and I are on the same page as we said.
10 more minutes?
Yes.
Okay. So you're both at Lundy, you're both action oriented, you want to get down to specifics of things you can personally do.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So in 10 minutes, let's focus on this. All right. The first thing you can do that's most important that you can weave into your language arts is yes, you have to satisfy the test. But the thing about language, my mother was a first grade, second grade, third grade teacher and English as a second language teacher. And the thing about language is that you can make up what the subject matter is. You have certain restrictions, but you can have them learning language around the subject matter being open. And you can weave in environmental subjects, and there's many of them. Because within ecosystemic health, there's everything from recycling to computer models about how the whole system works, to STEAM topics, all the way to political, economic topics. In other words, any possible topic can be put in the context of ecosystemic health. So there you have the opportunity to bring it in action starting immediately. It's just that every single assignment you give, you put it within an ecosystemic health context. Every single one. Every single one. Okay. But, you know, if they want to write about cosmetics, they can write about the recycling of cosmetic containers, or animal cruelty, or about the chemicals or the natural ingredients used in the cosmetics. Every single writing piece can be within the context of ecosystemic health. That's action that no one is going to stop you on. The next point is this. When you are a teacher within an institution, an educational institution, and you try to change the institution, you run into frustration. Both of you have expressed that. If you think like a subversive activist, you can stop being frustrated. Stop trying to change the school. Think of it that they're giving you permission to have access to these future leaders who are going to change the world. And you get to inspire and empower those future leaders. Don't try to change the school, change the minds. You'll be a lot less frustrated. All right? Because trying to change the school is an unending and kind of thankless process. Just because you get the suppliers to get, recycled paper instead of not recycled paper, you haven't changed the world very much. The problem with these, there was a time when I and a bunch of my friends made 101 simple things you can do for the environment. Back in the 80s, it was a thing. And I wasn't the only one. My group wasn't the only one. Someone did a book, 50 things that you can do for the environment. And another, this was an idea all over the world, making lists of simple things. What you can do with your toothbrush when it's no longer usable, right? You can use it to clean, other things, right? These are small things that everybody can do, but the problem is they are small things. And it is taking up too much of people's time and attention doing all these small things that don't solve the problem. They do not make a big enough difference. All the recycling, unfortunately, is not enough to change the fact, because most of the raping of the earth is being done by big corporations that are not affected by our recycling. The way to change the world is by changing the minds and inspiring them to do 10 or 100 times more than they would have done with their life otherwise. All right? So what I was saying before about the rocket ship to get to the moon versus high jumping. See, you all are trying to jump an inch higher and an inch higher in the high jump. It doesn't get you to the moon. You'll be a lot less frustrated if you don't try to jump to the moon. If rather you nurture the seeds, your students as seeds, who can become oak trees, right? Those students could become much more than they would normally have, just because of you as their teacher in the formative years. The earlier you get to them, the more formative you can be. The younger they are, the more you can shape their lives. If you give them the confidence that they can change the world, they become the ones who do it. If you give them the empowerment so that they become lifelong learners, then they can absorb what they need and gather the resources later on. And the most important, so you've given them motivation and you've given them empowerment and you've given them confidence, but without the distant stars, without the navigation, that's not enough. They could become rich and famous if you give them empowerment and encouragement and self-confidence. But the key is to give them this ecosystemic health, the wealth and well-being of the ecosystem, as the most important thing. Nothing is more important. Nothing is more important. No matter what they think is important, this is more important. That, if you can do that, and because you're language teachers, you have the freedom of what the content of the language is. And this also, by the way, drives, for example, say you have a contest. This is one of 1,000 ideas you can make up. Have a contest. In your next assignment, use 10 words that you didn't know before and that no one else in the class knows, and that you're going to include them in your writing. And say you're teaching in Spanish and English, so you want the Spanish version of the word, the English version of the word. And you're going to go do a Google search on each of the 10 words in English and each of the 10 words in Spanish. And when you present this to the class, maybe they're going to read what they wrote, maybe they're not going to read what they wrote. That's optional. But they're going to explain, this is the English word I learned, this is the Spanish word, and they don't mean exactly the same thing. And then explain the cultural differences. But the requirement is that all those words have to be relevant to ecosystemic health. All the words they pick, they had to find by researching about ecosystemic health topics, which are environmental topics, renewable energy topics, sustainability topics. In other words, ecosystemic health is the phrase from which you get to everything else. And you can have posters on your walls where they draw, like, you know, the spoke diagrams, where you have a circle, where you have spokes coming out to other circles, and then those have spokes. So you put ecosystemic health in the middle, and then all the different things that are related to ecosystemic health. Environment, renewable energy, species, you know, and then you have, like, from species, you have species extinction, and coral reefs, and rainforest, and, you know, all the different things relating to species and species extinction. And then here you have climate, and from climate, you got all these things. So in other words, what you're doing, you know, you might cover the entire wall, by the way. You know, you might paint a big circle in the middle of paper that covers the whole wall, and write ecosystemic health in the middle, you know, big, big, big in the middle of the circle. And then you have maybe 10 or 20 smaller but medium-sized circles. Climate, species, environmentalism, you know, big, big sub-subjects. It's an outline, right? It's a radial outline. Do you teach your students to write from outlines? You make an outline and then you write from the outline?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, this is a way of showing an outline where you're doing it spatially, where instead of the topic and subheads, you have the topic as a circle, and then you have a bunch of lines coming out to be all the subheads, right? And then each subhead is in a circle, and then it has a bunch of lines coming out. Well, what you do is that whenever they come up with a word that the class agrees should go there, they get to write it on the poster. They get to write their word on the poster, and they get to put their name. If you want to have everybody have their name or not, that's up to you. You know, whether their name goes there or not. Maybe they have their own color or their own handwriting. They don't have to put their name if it's in their own handwriting, right? Because people will know. They'll say, oh yeah, that was my word, right? And so it's a cooperative game, that goes all year long. And then the next year you can have another one, and then you can show them, you know, say you could have photographs of the previous year, how many words, and say, last year we had 1,200 words. Can you do 1,201? Yes, let us look at that one. And so then the question, you have a photograph, you say, all right, here's a photograph. And if a photograph, they can't see the details. All they can, the beauty of this approach is you can take a photograph and they can't see all of the words. So you say, this is your inspiration. Everybody gets a photograph. Now it's your job to go out and find, right? The beauty of this, though, is it gets them learning the concepts behind the words. And it gets them motivated. And it increases their literacy to learn about the subject matter. And it gives them the language and the framework. You know, I'm so excited, you know, because of you asking this, you posing this to me, and now me focusing on your role, your elementary school at Lundy, which has special meaning to me, and you are doing language in El Paso, therefore it's multilingual. So with those constraints, look at what I've suggested you, and I took all these ideas from other things, and now I've given you something that I'm excited about now. I've never said, cover a wall and do this particular thing, although I work from outlines. I'm looking at an outline right now, and the items that the bonus topics, the line number is 448,098. And that's not all. I mean, there's over 500,000 items in this outline that I run my life with. Outlining is one of the best skills that anybody could ever have. It really is. It's a tool for thinking, right? And if you teach outlining to your students, that is a tremendous tool for organizing their ideas and their research and for public speaking and for all kinds of things. So here's something you can do in your classroom. They can Google, they can use social media, they can use all the things that they want to spend their time on to go find words that no other person in the class has already found. And they come in with this word, and the word is externalities. And they're all excited. And then someone says, well, I came up with that last week. See, it's over there. But since but you give a reward, the second person who gets that word then gets a chance to write an essay about that and then get up there. You know, in other words, you just make the game, it's a cooperative game. So if you're this, like say you're the second person to come up with the word, then you get to write your next assignment about that subject, together with the person who came up with it the first time maybe, and together as a team. And then you start getting teams of people interested in different parts of the map. And they start doing research, and they start doing writing, and they do an English version and a Spanish version. And Denise and Christina, if you do this, I own over 1,000 domain names, web domains. I will dedicate a domain. If you guys do this, I will give you a website and a domain, a permanent domain name, that this can become a thing. They could upload photographs, and later on we'll put the outline online, and people all over the world potentially could start plugging into something that started at Lundy by you, right? That's how to think big, right? That's how to start with the here and now that's in your control, in your classroom, without having to ask any administrator, without having to go up against any friction. Stop trying to change the administrators. You've got the students. They're the future. They're the future. I mean, think about it. Somebody who just would grow up and get a job in, say, Applebee's, and then get married, and then maybe later get another job doing something online. Instead, maybe you change their passion in life so they become someone who becomes like a Greta Thunberg type person, right?
Okay.
I mean, to be a Greta Thunberg type person, you don't have to have any particular skill or particular genetics. You have to have the passion and the dedication and the absolute, to be like fearless, because, Greta's not fearless. She's afraid we're destroying the whole ecosystem, that the climate is collapsing. But because she has that fear, all the rest is small potatoes. So if you empower your students along these lines, and if you give them confidence that they can change the world, and you give them the essentials that we've talked about today, there's no limit. There's no limit. And there's no frustration from the administration and the institution and the structure. Instead, when the students start doing extra time on their homework, and the parents say, you're spending all your time on the computer, aren't you supposed to do your homework? No, I am. I'm doing my homework on the computer. And see, I'm learning about externalities, and I'm learning about disintermediation, and I'm learning about bioshelters. And the parent goes, oh, that's interesting. And what grades do you teach? You teach what grades?
I teach third.
Third?
Fourth and fifth.
Third, fourth, and fifth. Okay, so you can imagine these kids doing that, and their parents see a third, fourth, or fifth grader at home studying about subjects that are taught in a university. I am firmly convinced third, fourth, and fifth graders can learn about subjects that they teach in universities all they need is the word and Google.
Yes.
And they just go start absorbing all this knowledge. I mean, when I was that age, there was a book by Isaac Asimov called The Neutrino. It was not one of his science fiction books. It was one of his books about science, about subatomic particles, and it's called The Neutrino. And I got so excited about the neutrino, right? It's if a kid gets excited about a subject, they don't have to have all the physics, they don't have all the scientific prerequisites. They just dive in. Right? Mm-hmm. That is a recipe for you all being a lot happier.
Definitely.
A lot more fulfilled.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to see you all next week.
Yes.
Yes.
And in a week, if you did anything this week with those ideas, I mean, no pressure, it's your homework if you want it. But you asked for something you could do right away, right? Action.
Yeah.
Yes.
Try something small with your students. Make it easy. And remember what I said about kindergarten and first grade. Their body. You don't feel good when you're sick. Well, even a kindergartner says, duh. Of course I don't feel good when I'm sick. And you think, well, how does Mother Earth feel when she's sick? Well, duh, they're not good, right? Well, what if you were Mother Earth? Well, you're part of Mother Earth, aren't you? I mean, in other words, these are things that you can teach to the youngest. So by the time they're in 3rd or 4th or 5th grade. So you just keep coming back to that ecosystemic health. Just keep coming back to that. Whenever it gets off track, bring it back to that.
Yes.
Right? And to remember that, there's a picture of ecosystemic health. Put the health and well-being of the entire ecosystem in your heart.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pearlmutter. We appreciate it. Thank you for taking your time to speak with us.
Well, Christine and Denise, I'm very, very happy that you all are actually putting things into action. Of everything we did today, you all could potentially make the biggest difference. From this talk, if you all empower your students, the possibilities are amazing. I'm on the Regional Renewable Energy Advisory Commission, Council, here in El Paso. It's a body of the El Paso city government. And one of the things that I suggested is now been taken up by the Director of Sustainability for the city of El Paso. And she said to me just this week that she loved my idea and she wants to have a renewable energy cluster, like an economic development cluster. Well, imagine your students, by the time they graduate high school, could potentially step into a renewable energy cluster, a whole new industry that never existed in El Paso before. The possibility, what you're doing, your students could come back to you in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and say, Miss Marin, Miss Valencia, oh, I got this job designing solar systems because of you teaching me about the word photovoltaic back when I was at Lundy. It could happen, right?
Yes, possible.
Okay, folks. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thank you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.